Welcome back to the channel. This is a story I need to tell you. We're going to talk about the most brutal war in Fallout history, not the Great War that everyone remembers. Something worse, something that lasted 25 years before the first nuke ever fell. Most people think civilization ended on October 23, 2077. 2 hours of nuclear fire that destroyed the world. But the world died long before that. It died slowly, painfully. Over 25 years of something called the Resource Wars. This is the story of how America annexed Canada and erased an entire nation. How we invaded China and turned Asia into a graveyard. How we experimented on our own people and created monsters in the name of security. How we became exactly what we claimed to fight against. This is about the war that made the Great War inevitable. The war that killed our humanity before the bombs ever killed our civilization. The war nobody wants to remember, because remembering means admitting what we became. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. They tell you war never changes, but nobody tells you what that actually means until you see it with your own eyes. Until you're standing there with mud up to your knees and someone else's blood on your hands, and you realize the world ended long before the bombs ever fell. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I was there. I saw what we did to each other before October 23, 2077, before the Great War. Everyone remembers the nukes. Everyone talks about the radiation and the bombs and the 2 hours that destroyed civilization. But nobody wants to talk about the 25 years before that. Nobody wants to remember the Resource Wars. I'm going to tell you about the most brutal conflict in human history. Not the Great War. That was just the period at the end of a very long, very bloody sentence. I'm talking about what came before. The war that lasted a quarter century. The war that turned neighbors into enemies and allies into victims. The war that proved we didn't need nuclear weapons to destroy ourselves because we were doing a pretty good job of it already. It started in April of 2052. That's when the European Commonwealth marched into the Middle East. Oil prices had been climbing for years. Nations were going bankrupt. The global economy was built on petroleum and uranium, and both were running out. So Europe did what desperate empires always do. They sent in the military. I was just a kid then. 16 years old. I remember my father coming home from work at the refinery and turning on the television. We watched the news together, watched footage of European tanks rolling through desert cities, watched diplomats argue in expensive suits while people died on grainy camera feeds. My father turned to me and said something I'll never forget. He said the United Nations would stop this. He said there were rules, mechanisms, ways to prevent wars like this. 3 months later, the United Nations collapsed, disbanded, gone. Turns out rules don't mean much when everyone's starving and the lights are going out. By July of 2052, the organization meant to prevent another world war simply ceased to exist. Nobody even pretended anymore. The mask came off. It was every nation for itself now. That's when things got worse. In December of 2053, a terrorist detonated a nuclear weapon in Tel Aviv. Just erased the city. Hundreds of thousands dead in an instant. That was the first nuclear weapon used in anger since Nagasaki. It wouldn't be the last. The Middle East turned into a nuclear battlefield. Not the apocalypse you're thinking of. Just small exchanges, tactical nukes. Like that somehow made it better. Like thousands dead instead of millions. Was something to be proud of. The war between Europe and the Middle East dragged on for years. It never really ended. It just sort of bled into everything else. Metastasized. That's the word the doctors use for cancer that spreads. That's what the Resource Wars were. A cancer eating the world alive, one nation at a time. Back home in America, things were changing too. We watched it happen on our screens. Watched other countries tear themselves apart, and we told ourselves we were different. We told ourselves we were safe. We had resources. We had technology. We had the American dream. We were lying to ourselves. By 2052, the United States had closed its borders. Completely. Nobody in, Nobody out. They called it a quarantine, but everyone knew what it really was. Fear. The government was terrified. Terrified of refugees. Terrified of spies. Terrified that what was happening over there would happen over here. And you know what? They were right to be scared, just not in the way they thought. See, closing the borders didn't stop the rot. It just trapped it inside with us. I joined the military in 2059. I was 23. They were calling it the Anchorage Front Line, Alaska. We were building up defenses to protect the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the oil fields, the last major petroleum reserves on American soil. The recruitment officer told me I'd be defending American interests, protecting freedom, serving my country. He didn't tell me I'd be pointing my rifle at Canadians, Canada, our neighbor, our ally. They'd been helping us, you see, letting us run military operations through their territory, letting American soldiers march across their land to defend Alaskan oil. They didn't have much choice. We pressured them. Economic sanctions, political threats, the kind of pressure that breaks governments. And when the Canadian people started to push back, when they started protesting American military presence on their soil, we pushed harder. I remember the first time I saw Canadian protesters. This was 2067. We'd just been granted permission to station troops near the pipeline. Permission. That's a funny word for what actually happened. The Canadian government caved because we didn't give them a choice. We needed their resources, their land, their timber and minerals and everything else to fuel our war machine. The protesters were holding signs. Peaceful. Angry, but peaceful. They were calling us occupiers, calling us thieves. They were right, but we had orders. We had guns. We had the weight of American military might behind us. So we stood there in our body armor and watched Canadian citizens scream at us, and we told ourselves we were the good guys. That lasted about 3 years. In the winter of 2066, everything changed. China invaded Alaska. They came across the Bering Strait in the dead of winter. Thousands of troops, airborne assault, naval support. General Jingwei led the invasion himself. They hit us hard and fast, and within weeks they'd taken Anchorage. They controlled the pipeline. They controlled the oil. And just like that, the Sino-American War began. You want to know why China did it? Same reason Europe invaded the Middle East. Same reason America would later do the unforgivable. Desperation. China's economy was collapsing. They'd built everything on fossil fuels, and the fossil fuels were gone. They asked us to sell them oil. We said no. We needed every drop for ourselves, so they took it. I don't blame them for that. I mean, I did at the time. We all did. Every soldier on that line thought we were fighting communists and aggressors and enemies of freedom. But looking back now, standing here in the ruins of everything we built, I understand. They were dying. Their people were starving. Their lights were going out. And we had what they needed, and we wouldn't share. So they took it. Just like we would later take from Canada. Just like everyone was taking from everyone else. War never changes, but it does get worse. The Anchorage front line turned into hell. Trench warfare. In Alaska. In the 21st century. We were fighting with power armor and energy weapons and computer-guided artillery, and we were stuck in trenches like it was 1917 all over again. The Chinese dug in. We dug in. And for years, almost a decade, we just killed each other in the snow. I lost friends in those trenches. Good people. People with families. People with dreams. They died for oil. They died because two empires couldn't figure out how to share a dying planet. And the worst part, nobody back home even cared. By 2070, the American public was exhausted. They'd been at war for 18 years. 18 years of rationing and propaganda and body bags coming home. They were rioting in the streets. Food riots. Energy riots. People were starving and freezing and watching their tax dollars disappear into foreign wars that never seemed to end. The government's response? Martial law. Thought police. They started arresting people for speaking out, for questioning the war. They tapped phones, read mail, monitored everything. Freedom became a memory. Democracy became a joke. By the early 70s, America had turned into the kind of totalitarian state we'd spent decades claiming to oppose. And China? China was doing the same thing. Two superpowers, two police states, both convinced they were the righteous ones, both willing to do anything to win, including things that should never be done. In 2073, China started using biological weapons aggressively. They sprayed our positions with agents we didn't have names for. Viruses, bacteria, things engineered in laboratories to kill as efficiently as possible. Soldiers started getting sick, not radiation sick, not wounded, sick. Their skin would blister, their lungs would fill with fluid. They died choking and screaming, and there was nothing we could do. The American response was predictable. If China was going to use bioweapons, we'd develop our own. Better ones, worse ones. The Pan-Immunity Virion project started in September of 2073. The goal was to create a virus that would rewrite human DNA, make us immune to biological weapons. A defensive measure, they said. For protection, they said. They were lying. What they created was the forced evolutionary virus, FEV, the thing that would eventually create super mutants and nightmares and horrors beyond imagining. But that came later. In 73, it was just a research project, just scientists in lab coats working on the cutting edge of genetic engineering, just men and women following orders. I didn't know about FEV back then. None of us did. It was classified, above top secret, hidden away in facilities like Mariposa and West Tech. But rumors spread, whispers in the barracks, stories about human test subjects and experiments that crossed lines nobody should cross. We told ourselves the rumors were Chinese propaganda. We told ourselves our government wouldn't do that. We were the good guys. We were Americans. We didn't experiment on our own people. We were wrong about that too. By 2074, the war in Alaska had been going on for 8 years. 8 years of stalemate. 8 years of dying for nothing. The American public was done. Done with the war. Done with the sacrifices. Done with empty promises from leaders who kept saying victory was just around the corner. The pressure was building. Something had to give. So the United States made a decision. If we couldn't win in Alaska, we'd open a second front. We'd invade China. Mainland China. We'd take the war to them. They called it a counter-invasion, a defensive measure. We were only trying to destabilize the Chinese war effort, they said. Protect American interests, they said. But everyone knew what it really was. Escalation. Desperation. The last roll of the dice by an empire that was running out of options. American infantry and mechanized divisions landed in Shantou in 2074. They went through the Philippines, thousands of Marines hitting the beaches, power armor units, the best equipment we had. They pushed inland, fought their way up to the Yangtze River, Shanghai, Nanjing, the major cities of eastern China. It was supposed to be quick. A lightning campaign, in and out, forced China to the negotiating table. But it wasn't quick. It turned into another meat grinder, another stalemate. The Chinese fought like demons to defend their homeland. And why wouldn't they? We were invaders. We were destroying their cities, killing their people. They had every right to resist. The Yangtze campaign consumed thousands of lives. American lives, Chinese lives, civilian lives. Nobody was keeping count anymore. Or if they were keeping count, they weren't telling us. We just knew that every week brought more casualties, more body bags, more letters home to families who'd never see their sons and daughters again. And the worst part, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Taking Shanghai didn't end the war. Taking Nanjing didn't end the war. We were spread across 3 fronts now. Alaska, mainland China. And the third front, the one nobody talks about, the one I can't forget. Canada. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way. See, while we were fighting in China, while American soldiers were dying on foreign soil, something terrible was happening right next door. Canada was being bled dry. We were stripping their forests for lumber, mining their minerals, taking their resources to fuel our war machine. And we weren't asking permission anymore. We weren't playing nice. We were taking what we wanted. And when the Canadian people objected, when they rioted and protested and tried to defend what was theirs, we responded with violence. The annexation of Canada began officially on June 3rd, 2072. Commander Buzz Babcock announced it to the press. He called Canada Little America, said it had always belonged to the United States. said we were just reclaiming what was ours. It was a lie, a naked, ugly lie. But nobody stopped us. Who was going to stop us? The United Nations was long dead. Europe was still fighting in the Middle East. China was busy defending against our invasion. Russia was barely holding itself together. There was nobody left to say no. Nobody left to enforce the old rules about sovereignty and borders and the rights of nations. So we took Canada, and we did it with an iron fist. I was transferred to the Canadian front in 2075. By then, the annexation was nearly complete. Nearly. There were still pockets of resistance. Canadian armed forces, freedom fighters, people who refused to accept that their country had been erased. People who kept fighting even though fighting was hopeless. My orders were simple. Pacify the resistance. Maintain order. Protect American assets. That's what they called the pipeline and the lumber operations and the mining facilities. Assets. Like they weren't sitting on stolen land. Like we had any right to be there. The first time I shot a Canadian civilian, I threw up. He was a protester, part of a group blocking a supply convoy. He had a rifle, old hunting rifle, the kind you use for deer. He pointed it at us and my sergeant ordered us to fire. So we did. 10 soldiers with military-grade weapons against one man with a bolt-action rifle. He died instantly. His body hit the pavement and his blood spread across the road, and I turned away and vomited into the dirt. My sergeant told me I'd get used to it. He was right. By the end of 2075, I'd shot dozens of people. Protesters, rioters, resistance fighters. I stopped throwing up, stopped feeling sick. I didn't stop feeling guilty though. That guilt never went away. It's still here, 200 years later, and I can still see their faces. Still hear the sound of bodies hitting the ground. Pictures started leaking back to the States. That's what broke a lot of people. Not the soldiers doing the killing, the civilians back home seeing what we were doing. Photographs of Canadian protesters being executed. Video footage of power-armored soldiers gunning down unarmed crowds. Images of burned villages and mass graves. And the systematic destruction of a nation that had been our friend. The American public was horrified. Protests erupted in every major city, people demanding we withdraw from Canada, demanding accountability, demanding we stop the madness. The government responded the same way they always did, with force. They deployed the same power armor units that were killing Canadians to American streets. They used them for crowd control, for riot suppression, for keeping American citizens in line. That's when I realized we'd already lost the war, lost ourselves. Lost whatever it was that made us believe we were different from the empires we'd spent centuries condemning. We were killing our neighbors, we were killing our own people, and we were doing it all for oil that would run out anyway, for resources that couldn't save us, for a war that nobody could win, but we kept fighting, because that's what nations do when they're dying. They thrash, they lash out, they hurt everyone around them as they go down. The Canadian resistance never had a chance. By January of 2076, the annexation was complete. Canada ceased to exist as a nation. The provinces became American territories. The Canadian armed forces were destroyed or absorbed. The freedom fighters were hunted down and executed. And the pipeline, the precious pipeline that started it all, swarmed with American military units, making sure every drop of oil flowed south. I remember standing guard at a checkpoint near the border, former border. There was no border anymore. Just American territory stretching from Mexico to the Arctic. I watched civilians trying to flee, families with whatever possessions they could carry. They had nowhere to go, the borders were closed, but they tried anyway because staying meant living under occupation. Living in a country that wasn't their country anymore. We turned most of them back. Orders. But some we let through. The ones who looked desperate enough. The ones who might cause trouble if we didn't. I'd slip them passes sometimes when my commanding officer wasn't looking. Forged documents. Fake authorization. It wasn't much. Couldn't save many, but I had to do something. Had to believe I was still human, still capable of mercy. One family I remember particularly well. A woman with 2 children, boy and girl, maybe 8 and 10 years old. The woman had a black eye and burns on her arms. She didn't say what happened, didn't need to. I knew what was happening in the occupied zones, the violence, the abuse. The things soldiers do when nobody's watching and nobody cares. I gave her a pass, told her to head east, avoid the main roads. She looked at me with these empty eyes and said thank you, and I wanted to tell her I was sorry. Sorry for everything. Sorry for the uniform I wore, and the flag I served, and the empire that destroyed her home. But I didn't say anything. Just watched her walk away with her children and hoped they'd make it. Hoped they'd survive whatever came next. They probably didn't. Nobody did. While we were busy destroying Canada, the war in China was getting worse. The Yangtze campaign dragged on. Shanghai held out for months. Nanjing turned into a siege that consumed entire divisions. American forces pushed deeper into Chinese territory. The Gobi campaign. Operations in the interior. We were fighting on Chinese soil, fighting their people, fighting their army, and they were fighting back with everything they had, including weapons that violated every treaty humanity had ever written. The biological weapons got worse. China was using things that didn't just kill, they transformed, they mutated. Soldiers would come back from patrols changed, skin sloughing off, bones growing wrong, minds deteriorating. We started wearing sealed suits, full hazmat gear under our power armor. Didn't always help. Some of the agents China deployed could eat through military-grade protection like it was paper. Our own bioweapons weren't any better. By 2076, the FEV research had advanced. They were testing it on animals, then on prisoners. Chinese prisoners of war, American prisoners, military personnel convicted of desertion. Anyone the government decided was expendable. The results were classified, but the rumors were everywhere. Stories about things that used to be human. Things that were stronger and bigger and nearly impossible to kill. Things that had lost everything that made them people. I saw one once, an FEV subject. This was late '76. I was rotating back, through California for reassignment, and we passed through a checkpoint near Mariposa. I wasn't supposed to be there. Took a wrong turn. Ended up near a restricted zone. There was a transport truck loading something. The back door was open just a crack, and I saw it, 8 feet tall. Green-grey skin, muscles like armor plating. It was chained, sedated. But even sedated, you could see the power in it, the wrongness. It turned its head and looked at me, and its eyes were still human, still aware, still trapped inside that monster body. I ran. Didn't report what I'd seen, didn't ask questions. Some things you don't want confirmed. Some horrors are better left as nightmares than acknowledged as reality. But I couldn't unknow what I knew. Couldn't pretend anymore that we were the good guys fighting for freedom and justice. We were torturing people, experimenting on prisoners, creating weapons that shouldn't exist. And for what? To win a war? We weren't winning. Both sides were losing. Losing resources, losing people, losing our humanity. Back in Alaska, the tide was finally turning. The T-45 power armor had helped, given us an edge, but it wasn't enough. The Chinese were tough, disciplined, willing to die for every inch of frozen ground. The stalemate continued through most of the 70s, a grinding war of attrition where both sides bled and nobody gained anything meaningful. Then in June of 2076, we deployed the T-51, the pinnacle of power armor technology. Stronger, faster, better protected, nearly invincible. The soldiers wearing T-51 armor were like walking tanks. They could punch through Chinese lines like they weren't there, could shrug off small arms fire, could operate in environments that would kill unprotected troops in minutes. The T-51 changed everything. For the first time in a decade, American forces started pushing the Chinese back, started reclaiming territory. By January of 2077, we'd liberated Anchorage. The Chinese forces were routed. General Jingwei was dead. Alaska was ours again. We'd won. After 11 years of hell, we'd actually won. The victory was announced with parades and propaganda. The American people were told their sacrifices had meaning. Their dead sons and daughters had died for something. We'd defeated the communist threat. We'd secured American interests. We'd proven that America was still the greatest nation on earth. It was all bullshit. Anchorage didn't matter. The oil didn't matter. We'd spent 11 years and countless lives fighting over resources that were almost gone anyway. The victory was meaningless. Worse than meaningless. It was a lie we told ourselves, while everything fell apart. Because winning in Alaska didn't end the war. It just freed up troops to deploy elsewhere. Veterans of Anchorage, soldiers who'd spent a decade in frozen hell, were immediately shipped to China, or back to the States to control the riots. The riots that were everywhere now. Food riots, energy riots. People were starving. The economy was in free fall. Resources were so scarce that even basic necessities were luxuries. And the government's response was to point guns at its own citizens and tell them to get back in line. I watched power armor units deploy against American protesters in Denver. This was March of 2077. I was there, part of the crowd control force. We had orders to suppress the riot by any means necessary. The protesters were civilians, hungry people demanding food, demanding their government stop spending everything on foreign wars, demanding basic human dignity. We opened fire, not warning shots, not rubber bullets, live ammunition, power-armored soldiers gunning down American citizens in American streets. I didn't fire. I couldn't. I stood there with my rifle and watched my brothers in arms massacre the people we were supposed to protect. Watched bodies pile up. Watched blood run into the gutters. Watched the American dream die in a hail of bullets and broken promises. That night, I went back to my barracks and I knew with absolute certainty that we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. Knew that whatever happened next, whatever the future held, America, as we'd known it, was already dead. The bombs would just make it official. Some soldiers started deserting. Not many. Most of us were too afraid. Desertion meant execution, military prisons. But some couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't keep following orders that went against everything they'd sworn to protect. They vanished into the chaos, disappeared into the wasteland of violence and desperation that America had become. I don't know what happened to them. Hope they found some kind of peace. Hope they survived what came next. But I doubt it. By summer of '77, both superpowers were coming apart at the seams. China was barely holding together. Their supply lines were broken. Their economy was destroyed. American forces were deep in Chinese territory and pushing further every day. The T-51 units were carving through their defenses. Shanghai had fallen. Most of the Yangtze River Valley was under American control. China was losing badly, and they knew it. America wasn't much better off. We'd won in Alaska, but the cost was staggering. The mainland was a powder keg. Cities were under martial law. Desertion rates were climbing. The economy was so broken that the government had stopped pretending money meant anything. Everything was rationed. Everything was controlled. And still, people were dying. Dying of starvation. Dying of disease. The new plague was still out there, still killing, and we'd never found a cure. Just another failure. Another thing we'd sacrificed everything for and gotten nothing. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. The leadership knew it was over. They knew the system couldn't hold much longer. In March of '77, the president left the White House, quietly. No announcement, no farewell address, just disappeared to some oil rig off the California coast with his inner circle. They were preparing, building the enclave, setting up their survival plan, making sure that when everything collapsed, they'd be safe. They'd survive. The rest of us could burn. Military bases across the mainland started shutting down. Not because the war was ending, because there weren't enough soldiers to staff them anymore. Too many dead. Too many deployed overseas. Too many deserters. The bases that did stay open were automated, turned into robot-controlled defense installations, machines guarding an empire that was already dead. I was at Fort Constantine in August, watching them install the automated systems, watching them pack the missile silos with warheads that would never launch. The place felt like a tomb, empty, cold. The few soldiers still there moved like ghosts. Nobody talked about what was coming, but everyone knew. You could feel it in the air, the weight of inevitability. In China, the fighting was getting desperate, savage, both sides using everything they had: chemical weapons, biological agents, tactical nukes in some places. The rules of war, such as they were, had completely broken down. It was total war now, existential war. The kind where you're not trying to win. You're just trying to make sure the other side loses worse than you do. Chinese submarines were prowling the coasts. We'd see them sometimes. Periscope sightings, sonar contacts. They were out there, watching, waiting, loaded with nuclear missiles, waiting for the order. We had our own submarines, our own missiles, our own finger on the trigger. Mutually assured destruction. Mad. That's what kept the nukes from flying. The knowledge that if one side launched, both sides died. That logic had held for over a century. Through every crisis, every conflict, it was the foundation of the nuclear age. The thing that kept us from annihilating ourselves. In October of 2077, that logic broke down. I don't know exactly what happened at Mariposa. The official records are gone, lost or destroyed or hidden, but I know some of it, pieced it together from survivors, from scattered reports, from things people said before they died. The scientists at Mariposa were running human experiments, FEV tests on military prisoners, on their own soldiers, creating monsters in the name of national security, creating weapons out of human beings. Captain Roger Maxson found out. He was in charge of security at the base. Good man. Honorable. The kind of officer who actually believed in the oaths he'd taken. He discovered what the scientists were doing and he snapped. Interrogated them, got confessions, then executed them. Every last one, put them up against a wall and shot them for crimes against humanity. On October 20th, Maxson declared secession from the United States, sent out a formal declaration. He and his troops were no longer taking orders from a government that would do such things. They were done. Finished. They wanted a response from Washington. Wanted someone to acknowledge what had happened. Wanted accountability. Nobody responded. The government was already gone, already evacuated to their shelters and bunkers and secret facilities. The president was on his oil rig. The Joint Chiefs were underground. The enclave was in hiding. There was nobody left to respond. Nobody in charge. Nobody at the wheel. America was a corpse, still moving, still dangerous, but already dead. And China was in the same shape. Two dying empires locked in a death spiral. Both terrified, both desperate, both convinced the other side was about to strike first. They were both right. On October 23rd, I was stationed at the Switchboard, intelligence facility in Massachusetts, underground. We were monitoring Chinese military communications, watching their deployments, looking for signs of escalation, looking for any hint that the nukes might fly. We'd been on high alert for weeks, DEFCON 3, then DEFCON 2. The tension was unbearable. Every shift felt like it might be the last. Every signal could be the one that meant it was over. At 3 minutes past midnight, our detection systems picked up submersibles off the west coast. Chinese submarines, lots of them. They were supposed to be there, part of the standoff, but something was different. They were moving, repositioning, getting ready. At 3:37, we detected bombers, high altitude, Chinese bombers over American airspace. That shouldn't have been possible. Our air defenses should have stopped them, should have shot them down long before they got that close. But our air defenses were mostly automated now, mostly understaffed, mostly broken. They'd slipped through. At 9:13, we detected missile launches, multiple launches, from China, from the submarines, from somewhere. The displays lit up like Christmas. Dozens of launches, hundreds. The computer started calculating impact zones, started predicting casualties, started showing us in real time how the world was about to end. Someone was screaming. Maybe me, maybe everyone. The officer in charge grabbed the phone. The red phone. Direct line to NORAD, to whoever was left in command. He was yelling into it, yelling for confirmation, yelling for orders, yelling for someone to tell him what to do. The response came back fast. 4 minutes. That's all it took for the United States to decide to end the world. 4 minutes from detection to retaliation. 4 minutes from they launched to launch ours. 4 minutes to throw away everything. Every achievement, every dream, every possibility of a future. At 9:17, the first warheads hit. Los Angeles, gone, just gone. Millions of people erased in a flash of light and heat and radiation. Then Pennsylvania, New York, one after another, city after city. Each one a sun blooming on the surface of the earth. Each one a million deaths. Each one another nail in the coffin of humanity. Our missiles were flying too. I could see it on the displays. American warheads arcing across the Pacific, heading for Beijing, Shanghai, the cities we'd spent years trying to capture. We were burning them now. burning everything. If we couldn't have them, nobody could. If we were going to die, we'd take everyone with us. At 9:47, the detection system went offline. Too much electromagnetic interference, too many explosions, too much chaos. The screens went dark, the displays died. We were blind, sitting in our underground bunker with no idea what was happening on the surface. No idea if anyone was left alive. No idea if we'd already lost. The last thing I saw before the power failed was a targeting marker over Boston. Incoming warhead. Impact in 30 seconds. Then nothing. Darkness. Silence. The sound of breathing. 20 people trapped underground waiting to find out if they were the last humans left alive. That's when I heard it. Through the concrete. Through the reinforced walls. Through meters of earth and rock. The sound that everyone who survived remembers. The sound that echoes in your nightmares. The roar of a nuclear weapon detonating close enough to shake the world. The lights flickered. The walls cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. Someone was praying. Someone was crying. Someone was laughing. Mad laughter. The kind that comes when your mind breaks because reality has become too terrible to process. And somewhere above us, the world ended. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. But the ending, the real ending, that comes next. Because what I haven't told you yet is how I survived. Why I'm still here 200 years later. Why I remember everything. Why I can't forget. And what I learned in those final moments. The truth about the Great War. The truth about who really fired first. The truth that nobody wants to hear. The shaking stopped after what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. The emergency lights kicked in. Red. Everything bathed in red light like we were already in hell. Maybe we were. The commander started doing a head count, making sure everyone was still alive, still breathing. We were. All 20 of us had survived the initial blast, survived the shockwave, survived the moment the world ended, but we hadn't survived. Not really. We just hadn't died yet. There's a difference. The radiation detectors were screaming. Every single one off the charts. The surface was hot, lethally hot. Anyone up there was already dead or dying. The radiation would cook you from the inside, turn your cells into cancer factories, dissolve your DNA, kill you slowly and painfully over days or weeks. We were safe for now. The bunker was shielded, built to withstand a direct hit. But we couldn't stay forever. Eventually we'd run out of air, out of food, out of time. Someone suggested we wait it out. Wait for the radiation to decay. Wait for rescue. But there wasn't going to be any rescue. There was nobody left to rescue us. The government was gone. The military was gone. Civilization was gone. We were on our own. 20 soldiers in a hole in the ground waiting to die. I couldn't accept that. Couldn't just sit there and wait for the end. So I volunteered. Volunteered to go up, check the surface, see what was left, see if there was any hope at all. The commander tried to stop me, said it was suicide, said the radiation would kill me before I made it 100 meters. He was probably right, but I went anyway, because sitting in that red-lit tomb waiting for death was worse than dying. At least dying meant it would be over. They sealed me in a suit, full hazmat gear, lead-lined, the best protection we had. It wouldn't be enough, not against what was up there, but it was something. Better than nothing. The commander shook my hand, didn't say anything. What was there to say? Everyone knew I wasn't coming back. The elevator was dead. Power was out. So I took the stairs, emergency stairs, climbing up through the darkness with just a flashlight. Up and up, hundreds of steps. My breath echoing in the suit, my heart pounding, wondering with each step what I'd find at the top, wondering if anything would be left at all. The blast door was jammed, warped by heat or pressure. I had to force it, threw my shoulder against it again and again until finally it scraped open. Just wide enough to squeeze through, just wide enough to see. The sky was wrong. That's the first thing I noticed. The color, it should have been night, should have been black with stars, but it was green, sick green. And the clouds, they weren't clouds. They were ash, radioactive ash swirling in patterns that hurt to look at, lit from below by fires that were still burning. Fires that would burn for years. Boston was gone. I mean physically gone. Where the city had been, there was just a crater. A smoking crater miles wide filled with glass and slag, and the vaporized remains of everything that had existed there. Buildings, streets, people, all gone, reduced to atoms and scattered across the wasteland. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the rain. Black rain, radioactive fallout mixing with ash and falling from the sky in thick drops that burned where they hit. The rain was death. Concentrated death. Anyone caught in it would be dead within hours. The suit protected me, for now, but I could hear it sizzling against the material. Eating through slowly, but surely. I walked out into the wasteland. Had to see, had to know. My dosimeter was clicking so fast it was basically one long scream. The radiation levels were insane. Lethal. The suit would hold for maybe an hour. Maybe 2 if I was lucky. After that I'd be exposed. After that I'd be dead. The landscape was alien. Nothing looked right. The ground was scorched. Melted in places. Glass and metal fused together into grotesque sculptures. Here and there I saw shapes. Bodies, what was left of them. Burned shadows on broken walls. Skeletons still standing where they'd been when the blast hit. Flash vaporized. Gone before they even knew what was happening. The lucky ones. The ones who didn't have to see what came after. I found a car, or what used to be a car, just a twisted frame now. Melted tires, shattered glass. Inside were 2 skeletons, small, children, still in their car seats, still buckled in. Their parents had been trying to evacuate, trying to get away. They'd been caught in traffic, caught in the blast. The whole family ended together, burned away in an instant, leaving behind only bones and the question of why. Why did it have to be this way? Why couldn't we have found another path? Why did we choose annihilation over cooperation? I don't have good answers to those questions. I'm not sure anyone does. I walked for an hour, documenting what I saw, taking readings, gathering data that nobody would ever use because there was nobody left to use it. I saw more bodies, more destruction, more evidence that humanity had finally succeeded in doing what we'd been threatening to do for over a century. We'd destroyed ourselves. We'd built weapons capable of ending the world, and then we'd used them. Actually used them. Threw away billions of years of evolution and thousands of years of civilization because we couldn't share, couldn't compromise, couldn't stop fighting long enough to realize we were all on the same side. The radiation was getting to me. Even through the suit I could feel it, a tingling, a warmth that wasn't warmth, sickness building in my gut. My dosimeter had stopped clicking. It was broken. Too much exposure, too much radiation for it to measure. I knew what that meant. I was dead. Maybe not this minute. Maybe not today, but soon. The damage was done. My cells were cooking. My DNA was shredding. I was a corpse that hadn't stopped moving yet. I should have gone back. Should have returned to the bunker, spent my last hours with other humans. Died with dignity, with company. But I kept walking. I don't know why. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe the radiation was already affecting my brain. Or maybe I just needed to see. Needed to witness what we'd done. Needed to understand the full scope of our failure. I found the switchboard's surface access, the entrance I'd used to go down. It was collapsed, buried under rubble. The bunker below was probably intact, but there was no way back down, no way to reach the others. They'd die in there. Slow suffocation as the air ran out. Slow starvation as the supplies dwindled. Alone in the dark. At least I'd die in the light. At least I'd die having seen what we'd become. That's when I saw it. The vault. I almost missed it. Just another structure in the wasteland, but the door was open. Vault door, massive round door designed to seal away and protect whoever was inside. But it was open, slightly, like someone had tried to close it and failed. Like maybe there were people inside, people who'd survived. I stumbled toward it. My legs were weak. The radiation sickness was hitting hard now. I was going to collapse soon. But I made it to the door, made it inside, into the vault, into Vault 111. It was empty, mostly. There were cryopods, dozens of them, suspended animation. Pre-war technology designed to freeze people until the radiation cleared, until it was safe to emerge. Most of the pods were dark, broken, failed. The people inside dead for decades, frozen corpses in glass coffins. But one was still working. One pod still had power, still had life support, still had hope. I looked at the control panel, looked at the name. My name, somehow, I don't understand it. Don't understand how or why. Maybe Vault-Tec had me on a list. Maybe I'd signed up years ago and forgotten. Maybe it was random chance. The universe's idea of a joke, but there was a pod assigned to me. A pod that was empty. A pod that was waiting. I didn't hesitate. I was dying anyway. The radiation had cooked me. I had hours left. Maybe a day. But in the pod, in suspended animation, maybe I'd survive. Maybe I'd wake up when the world healed. When the radiation cleared. When humanity had another chance. I climbed inside. Sealed the suit. Initiated the sequence. The last thing I saw before the cryo-freeze took me was the vault door. Still open, still exposed to the wasteland. I wanted to close it, wanted to protect this last refuge. But I couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch as the world faded, as the cold seeped in, As everything went dark, I slept for 200 years. When I woke, the world was different. Worse in some ways, better in others. The radiation had decreased. Life had found a way. Plants and animals and even people, survivors, descendants of the ones who made it, who endured, who refused to give up even when everything was lost. But the scars remained, still remain. The world is broken, twisted, mutated. The Great War destroyed civilization, but the resource wars destroyed something deeper. They destroyed our humanity, our morality, our ability to see each other as human beings instead of obstacles to resources. The Great War lasted 2 hours. The resource wars lasted 25 years. 25 years of slow-motion apocalypse. 25 years of watching ourselves become the monsters we claim to fight. That's what I need you to understand. The bombs were terrible. The radiation was terrible. The nuclear winter and the starvation and the collapse of everything. All terrible, but they were consequences. Effects. The cause was the resource wars. The cause was us, our greed, our fear, our inability to share a planet that had more than enough for everyone if we just learned to cooperate instead of compete. We destroyed Canada, erased an entire nation, killed millions of people who'd been our friends, our allies, people who spoke our language and shared our values. We destroyed them for lumber and oil, for resources we'd use up in a few years anyway. Was it worth it? Was annexing Canada worth the cost? Worth the lives? Worth the guilt? We invaded China, opened a second front in a war we couldn't win, sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers to die on foreign soil, killed millions of Chinese civilians, destroyed cities that had stood for thousands of years. We did that. Not the Chinese, us. We invaded them. We were the aggressors. And for what? To secure resources that were almost gone anyway. To prove we were stronger. To feed the military-industrial machine that was already consuming us from the inside. We turned on our own people, used military force against civilians, shot protesters, experimented on prisoners, created monsters out of human beings in the name of national security. We became exactly what we claimed to be fighting against. A totalitarian state, a police state, an empire that would do anything, sacrifice anyone, destroy everything, all in the name of winning a war that had no winners. The Chinese did the same things. They used biological weapons. They killed their own people. They became monsters too. I'm not saying they were innocent. I'm saying we were all guilty. Both sides, all sides. Every nation that participated in the resource wars abandoned their humanity. We all became killers. All became willing to do the unthinkable. And that's why the bombs fell. Not because of miscommunication or accidents or rogue actors. The bombs fell because we'd already decided that mass murder was acceptable. That genocide was a valid strategy. That ending the world was preferable to admitting we were wrong. I've had 200 years to think about this. 200 years to walk through the wasteland and see what we created. The super mutants made from FEV. The ghouls created by radiation. The death claws and rad scorpions. And all the other horrors we unleashed. None of this had to happen. All of it was a choice. A series of choices. Choices we made every day for 25 years. Choices to escalate instead of negotiate. To fight instead of compromise. To destroy instead of share. The Great War gets all the attention. Gets remembered as the moment civilization ended. But it was just the final act. The period at the end of a sentence we'd been writing for decades. The resource wars were the real catastrophe. The real horror. Because they were slow. We had time. Time to stop. Time to change course. Time to realize where we were heading and choose a different path. And we didn't. We kept going, kept killing, kept destroying, right up until the moment there was nothing left to destroy but ourselves. So when people ask me about the Great War, when they want to know what happened, why it happened, I tell them this story. I tell them about the resource wars, about Canada and China, and the millions of people who died before the first nuke ever flew. I tell them about the choices we made, the lines we crossed, the humanity we abandoned. I tell them that the most brutal war in history wasn't the one that lasted 2 hours. It was the one that lasted 25 years. The one we fought against ourselves, against our neighbors, against everything that makes us human, because that's the truth. The truth nobody wants to hear. We didn't lose the war. We'd already lost. Lost ourselves. Lost our souls. Lost any claim to being civilized. The bombs just made it official. Made it impossible to pretend anymore that we were the good guys. Made it clear what we'd become, what we'd always been underneath the propaganda and the flags and the anthems. Murderers. All of us. Every person who stayed silent. Every soldier who followed orders. Every leader who gave those orders. Every citizen who supported the war. We're all guilty, all complicit. all responsible for the world we created. The wasteland isn't punishment from God or bad luck, or the inevitable result of progress. It's exactly what we chose, what we built, what we earned. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake even now, we'd do it again. If resources were scarce, if nations were desperate, if fear and greed took hold, we'd make the same choices, cross the same lines, destroy the same things. Because we haven't learned, haven't changed. We're still the same scared, violent, tribalistic apes we've always been, still willing to kill for resources, still willing to sacrifice others to save ourselves, still unable to see beyond our own immediate needs to the long-term consequences of our actions. I'm leaving this testimony, recording it, preserving it. Maybe someone will find it, maybe someone will listen. Maybe next time, if there is a next time, we'll make different choices. Choose cooperation over competition. Choose life over death. Choose hope over fear. Maybe, I doubt it, but maybe. That's all I have left. Hope. Thin, fragile, probably misplaced, but still there. Still alive. Because if I give up hope entirely, then they've won. The warmongers and the profiteers and the men who decided that destroying the world was acceptable. If I give up hope, then everything I survived, everything I witnessed, everything I lost, it all means nothing. So I hope, and I remember, and I tell this story, the story of the resource wars. The story of how humanity destroyed itself long before the bombs ever fell. The story of the most brutal war in history, the war we fought against ourselves, the war we lost, the war that made the Great War inevitable. This is my testimony, my confession, my warning to whoever finds it, whoever listens. This is what happened. This is why it happened. This is what we did. Learn from it, or don't. Repeat it, or don't. I've done what I can, said what needed saying. The rest is up to you, up to whoever comes next, up to the future we may or may not have. War never changes, but maybe, just maybe, we can.